solution is generally to warm our homes in the winter and cool them in the summer. However, that is often in direct conflict with some of New Zealand's other goals to reduce carbon emissions. One solution that helps solve both of these problems could be to improve the energy efficiency in homes, which should allow us to improve the indoor temperatures, potentially reduce emissions, and save money in the long run. But given our already high housing costs, it may be difficult for people to front the cost of these improvements, even knowing that there are long-run savings that they could potentially gain. And with the government's other goal of making the transition a just one, it is really important for us to find solutions that do not disproportionately burden some of the population. So we've already seen some backlash to the electric vehicle subsidies here in New Zealand. So it will be really great to hear today about the EU experience in this area, as well as to hear from some of our New Zealand experts to provide more of the New Zealand context. So I'll quickly go through and introduce our experts and give you an idea of what the agenda will look like. So after a short video on passive housing in New Zealand, we will first hear from Dimitrios Athanasiou, who is in charge of monitoring the efficient implementation of the European Union's legislation on the energy performance of buildings. Then next, we will hear from Uwe Bogalki, who is the team leader in charge of the deployment of innovative energy solutions for building renovations at the German Energy Agency. Then we'll have Kaisa-Rita Kasaskonen, who leads the Carbon Neutral Helsinki 2035 Action Plan and heads the climate unit for the city of Helsinki. Following her, we'll have Michael Jack, who is director of the energy program in the Department of Physics at the University of Otago. And finally, we'll wrap up with Andrew Eagles, who is the CEO of the New Zealand Green Building Council. So thank you again, everyone. After those presentations, we'll have about 30 minutes of questions. And throughout the webinar, if you have a question, please direct them to the Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. You also have the ability to upvote questions, which means that the most popular questions can get asked first. If your question is directed at a particular panelist, please include that in the question so we can direct it to the appropriate panelist. Thank you, everyone. So I will now pass it off to the passive housing video to get started.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm not sure if people can see our live feed from our Auckland Training Centre yet.
I don't see it.
So if someone could please allow for Natalie, who's my colleague in the Auckland office, to have access to the camera so she can share her screen, that would be appreciated.
Lucy, are you able to get that working?
Maybe just a quick introduction. So what we wanted to do is just a quick walk through our training facility in Auckland in New Zealand. So good morning and good evening to everyone, and also special greetings to Finland. Hyvää iltaa, I think, from memory. I had the privilege of studying with a few Finnish people while I was in Germany studying building science and timber engineering. So the interesting thing from our end was that when I came to New Zealand over 18 years ago now, the performance level of housing here is very low. As some of you people have experienced this, especially people coming from the Northern Hemisphere. When we talk about insulation performance and levels in Europe, often we find anything in terms of thickness of up to 400, 500 millimeter of insulation. In New Zealand, we're lucky to find 90 to 140. And what happened in the past was that we, from our end, we often try to educate people, similar to what the Green Building Council is doing on various levels, to really get the performance higher. And from our end, what we decided was actually to go ahead and actually showcase and build that. So we can see now a live feed from our Auckland facility. Natalie, I hope you can hear me. If you just want to walk through into the door and just walk through the positions. We 3 or 4 years ago, we actually built this training facility, and we use it for theoretical and practical training. And as you can see in the background, the blue house, it's a very Germanic house with the dormers that you can see there. We actually wanted to build a full-scale house to show and demonstrate to people of what it actually looks like in reality. So people need to experience things, because a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to experience this. Thank you, Natalie. If we can just go to the next position. As you can see in front of the house, we have lots of open space. There's a lot of little display models for people to touch and feel. We're in the building industry, so we're practical people, and therefore we need to see what options are available. We see a lot of more construction technology coming out of overseas North America, like cross-laminated timber, SIP panels, but also standard frame construction. Thank you, Natalie. If we can just walk into the house, please. One of the key things that we often see when we go into high performance houses is that they look the same as everything else. So if we just have a look around, you see it looks like a normal seminar house. We left a few things open so people can see some of the construction details. And on the right-hand side, we have some cutouts for people who use this as a seminar house. So you can see that we have our traditional framing set up with our insulation. In this case, we actually use wood fiber insulation from Germany. We have an air tightness and moisture control layer, which is unheard of most of the time in New Zealand, and also construction cavities or internal service cavities. If you could please open the door, Natalie. One of the key issues that we find in New Zealand is still the performance of windows and doors. So these are Passive House certified window and door units that we actually imported from Europe. We have luckily now also some local manufacturers in New Zealand who are able to produce to a high level. Thank you, Natalie. If you just want to step out. So this facility is open to anyone to use it. We have the seminar house for theoretical and practical training. We have the open area that's in front of the house that we can see there. And also we have sort of practical walls that people can work with. There's a little walk through the passive house that we built in Auckland. It's still to be certified. The reason is that we don't have an external climate data file because it's a house within the house, and we're monitoring currently our climate conditions so that we can run the passive house planning package, the PHPP, to get the passive house certified. Thank you very much, Natalie. I wish everyone a great time over the next hour and a bit for all the different presentations, and back to you, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. It's great to see some new solutions here in New Zealand to help us with some of these issues. So next we'll move on to Dimitrios Athanasiou, who's with the European Commission.
Thanks a lot, Lynn. Good morning, everybody. I guess it's morning there. My name is Dimitrios Athanasiou, and I'm a policy officer in the Commission in DG Energy, in the buildings team of the Energy Efficiency Unit. It is a great pleasure to be with you today and share with you our framework for the energy performance of buildings. Despite the fact that buildings are different and unique and reflect the culture and the history of each country, and despite the different climate, market conditions, we believe that we can all learn from each other, and apply the basic principles, which is reduce energy demand, integrate renewables and smart solutions, take advantage of technological improvements, and so on. So let me quickly share my screen with you, because I have prepared some slides. Can you see my screen? Sorry, I hope you can see my screen. So very quickly, let me start with some basic figures about the building sector in the EU. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure it out, how it works. Okay, here we are. So buildings are responsible for about 40% of EU's total energy consumption, and 36% of its greenhouse gas emissions. Due to well-established legislative framework, new buildings today are more efficient, and they consume something like 50% of what it used to be 20, 30 years ago. But still, existing buildings are very old and inefficient, and most of them will be starting actually by 2050. Almost 75% of our building stock are considered to be not highly efficient, while the renovation rates are still very low, about around 1% actually per year. But however, the construction sector generates about 9% of Europe's GDP, and directly accounts for 18 direct jobs, the 18 million direct jobs.
Sorry, Demetrios,
Yes,
would you be able to make your screen full screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I think if we
Okay.
can make it go to slideshow, that should do it.
Yes, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay, here we are. So I will try also to be within the 10-minute time limit. It's impossible to provide to you all the EU policies and the whole framework about it, but I will do my best, and if needed, we can discuss it later further. I would like to mention that today buildings are indeed very high in the political agenda, exactly because they have a high share of greenhouse gas emissions and total energy consumption, and also because of the multiple benefits that they bring to the society. I would say that
Sorry, Demetrios, we can't actually see your screen right now.
you can't see
If
my
it makes,
screen.
would you like to share my screen? Will that be easier?
Give me 1 second. I'm sorry for that. Yes, I think I know what the problem is. Give me 1 second. I think it's sorry about that. So I will share my screen again, hoping that it is better now.
And then if you just go into full screen, we can just.
Is it any better now, or still the same?
Still the same. How about I just share my screen and then you can speak over that?
Let me do it like this and this. Any better now?
No,
Is it better like this?
no,
Okay, sorry about that.
Demetrios, I think you need to let Lucy or one of the others share your slides, and you can just say next slide.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Okay.
That's right.
Just give me 1 second.
Stop sharing. Okay, then I have just stopped sharing the screen. So I suppose that you will upload the presentation for me?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Give me 1 second.
I'm really sorry for that. I don't know why.
Okay. Sorry, it's really not liking my computer. Is my problem. I'm wondering if we just swap between Demetrios and one of the other speakers in the meantime, just while I sort out his slides.
Or yes, I mean, we can also do that, or I can, you know, just continue, or just.
Lynn, what would you recommend?
yeah, let's go to the next person, and then we can maybe come back to Demetrios. Uwe Bigalki is the next speaker. He's from the German Energy Agency. Can we go to Uwe?
Yeah, hello, good morning. So I hope the technology works with me and you can see my screen now.
Yep, that's perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So good morning to New Zealand. Yeah, I'm Uwe Bigalke. I'm a project director for the German Energy Agency. I'm a civil engineer and head of the Energiesprong project here at German Energy Agency now for 4 years. And I'd like to talk about how we could scale up net zero retrofits in our countries. So yeah, first of all, if we look at other sectors, how the transformation works to renewable energies, we can see that there are scalable products, for example, in renewable energies, or for example, in terms of cars, we can see that there are products you can buy from the shelf. And usually, if we have scalable products, there can be a rapid transformation to other technologies, to clean technologies. But we can also see that in the building sector, we don't have these scalable technologies. And I think it's the same all over the world, no matter if in New Zealand or Germany. We don't have technologies or measurements you can buy just from the shelf. So if we look at the European market, I think Demetrios also said that it's a huge market. There's so much to renovate all over Europe. It would be a market of about 300 billion euros per year if we really would retrofit as much as we would need to achieve our goals here in the European Union. But still, even with that big market, there are no solutions that are scalable. So that's something we would call a market failure. Why is it like that? The main reason for that is that our construction sector works the same way as it did 50 years ago. That means all our sectors, like in industry, for example, raised their productivity. The industry tripled its productivity over 50 years, but the construction sector is still at the same level because it still works with the same methods than it did 50 years ago. So what we think is we will not solve our issues with our solutions for climate change with the technologies we had 50 years ago. We need to invent new technologies. And if we ask, how do we get to a sustainable, desirable building stock that's at the same time affordable for tenants and for homeowners, and how do we get there fast? Then our answer would be, we need innovation. We need, instead of single projects, we need products. What does it mean, a product in terms of building retrofit? We would think a building retrofit would work and could be bought from the shelf if we had solutions that were easy to get, quick to refurbish, affordable for tenants and owners, and at the same time, good. That means durable for a long time and highly efficient, such as a net zero concept. If we achieve these four things at the same time, we believe that it's possible to increase our refurbishment rate by far. So what can we do about that? Yeah, in the last years, we've had a lot of innovation in the building sector. Actually, we just need to use that. We can 3D scan our buildings very exactly. We even have drones today to do the scanning. And if we use that technology, we don't need to use these solutions because we think they're just not scalable. Here in Germany and all over Europe, we have a huge issue with scarcity of labor. We don't have the people to double our refurbishment because, yeah, there are just not enough skilled labor. So we would go away from these solutions and go to these solutions, facade panels, all integrated, maybe even ventilation or heating integrated into these panels that we can just hang to our old walls. And we would go away from those solutions where a lot of errors happen in the installation and go to these solutions. This is an energy module from the Netherlands where everything, the whole technology for a single family house is included. That means there's a heat pump integrated up here. There's a warm water storage down here. There's the ventilation system here, and there's some kind of monitoring system and PV system in here. So everything in one box, plug and play. We believe these are the solutions that we really need. So that's basically the Energiesprong idea. That means let's go away from single retrofit projects where everything is designed on the construction side and many things are done the way they're done on a construction site, sometimes this way, sometimes in another way. And let's go to retrofit products, things that can be scaled and done in the same way, the same process every time. You can see, for example, a robot here that puts the bricks on a facade panel that's installed here, or a whole roof that's installed over the old roof without the shingles on a single family building. Or here, this thing is a heat pump system, a whole energy module integrated into the old roof. Yeah, what can we do about that? We've seen in the Netherlands that already 5,000 of these retrofits have been finished. That means net zero retrofits where all the energy that the house needs over the year is generated on the roof for heating, for hot water, and also for household energy. And in Germany, we have a few pilots already going on. Germany, we have multifamily buildings that need to be retrofitted. And this is the way they are retrofitted with facade panels, everything integrated, passive house standard. And this is the way we can get these buildings to net zero homes. Well, we have a good political support in some countries. Here in Germany, there's a 300 million euros funding scheme for the development of new products such as facade panels, roof panels, energy modules. And also the European Union supports the Energiesprong idea with certain projects. It's also mentioned in the EU Innovation Wave. And outside Europe, we can also see, for example, in New York State, a 30 million euros funding support for new solutions. And what we try to do in the Energiesprong initiatives in 7 countries now is achieve a first market, not only pilot projects, but secure with a volume deal, secure a first volume, for example, 30,000 dwellings with housing associations to have a first market so that it makes sense for the industry to innovate on products. And this is the challenge we have in all these 7 countries. Basically, we try to get costs down with scale. So that's why we need the volume deal, and also through innovation with new products and new ideas. But at the same time, we try to improve the business cases for the owners. That means we try to allow for higher costs through additional incomes for the owners of the buildings, basically housing associations. And then we try, if there's still a gap in financiation, we try to fill that together with the local governments with some additional subsidies. So we can create a solution for the buildings that's affordable for tenants, but at the same time affordable for the owners as well. And if I'm talking about we, I mean the Energiesprong initiatives in 7 countries, such as Netherlands, Great Britain, France, Italy, the USA, or Canada. And all these initiatives are funded by the European Union, local governments, national governments, like here in Germany. And so we are all independent initiatives to drive this scale up, these markets forward. That's what we're doing. And yeah, if I could summarize what is necessary to build such a market, and we're still in the beginning, but we're sure that it's going to work in the next couple of years. Yeah, we can see that it's all about people who innovate, who make this change happen, an engaged group of people, but also engaged companies that try to make things differently. At the same time, political support is very important for all of us. The funding of a team to drive this change forward, but also we need to talk about legal barriers that sometimes exist in our countries for these new solutions because the laws haven't been made for such new solutions. Well, and then if we realize in all the countries that we need a lot of perseverance to drive this change forward because we transform a very old industry and that needs a lot of time and efforts. But we really think it's worth it, and we really think that we can make a big change. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. It sounds like we have Dimitrios' slides working again. So we're going to go back to Dimitrios and then we'll go to Kaisia.
Thanks a lot. I hope it really works now. Okay, here we are. So thanks again, and apologies for this inconvenience. So this was also a very interesting presentation and a very interesting project presented before. And actually, indeed, there are still many barriers in the construction business, especially for innovations. It's not always easy to go for innovation, and this is what we're trying to do actually, both with the legislation and also with initiatives such as the renovation wave strategy, which has been recently adopted, and I will try to quickly and briefly present to you. Next slide, please. So yes, I have briefly presented to you the situation, the current situation, which actually leaves us with a highly not efficient, with a non-efficient building stock. This is actually where we're really trying to interfere at this period, and also recognizing that buildings are not the scope of the building sector is not is now much broader as it used to be some years ago. So it's not only about improving the energy performance and energy demand, but it's also cutting energy savings and so on. But it's also about health, energy poverty, affordable housing, sustainable living, the integration of renewables or incorporating the circular economy principles, digital solutions, and so on. So next slide, please. So yes, very quickly, the most important piece of legislation we have for that is the Energy Performance of Building Directive, which provides the full spectrum of policies, like a methodology for the calculation of energy performance. And with this methodology, we also set minimum cost optimal energy performance standards. It's also about, we have this vision for new buildings to be nearly zero energy buildings starting from 2021. So this is actually a new provision that has just started to be implemented for new buildings. There are certification schemes in place for all buildings that are to be sold or to be rented out, so that citizens know exactly the energy rate of their building. We ask member states to go for regular inspection schemes for heating, cooling, and ventilation systems. One very important piece of legislation is the national long-term renovation strategies that have to come with specific milestones for 2030, 2040, and 2050, aiming to decarbonize the building stock, the existing building stock, by 2050. We can find in our legislation provisions supporting the mobility, the recharging points that now must be installed in new buildings or buildings that undergo major renovations. We have also introduced an optional scheme for the smart readiness indicator, so that we can see how buildings are related to the digitalization and other technologies, also support for building automation and control systems, and so on. But all this allowing for flexibility to member states to reflect the national conditions and like, for example, the climate, different climate conditions, the market uptake, and so on. And we also have a set of standards supporting all this legislative framework. The next slide, please. Then this legislative framework is also supported by other relevant pieces of legislation, like the Energy Efficiency Directive, which is an umbrella framework directive. And there we can see provisions regarding the public buildings that have to be renovated annually. 3% of the total floor area of public buildings must be renovated annually. There is also the eco-labeling and the eco-design legislation. The eco-design sets this minimum standards so that we can, for example, eliminate least performing products from the market, or the energy label also provides a clear indication of the energy efficiency of some key products, and of course the renewable directive promoting renewables in buildings. Next slide, please. All this framework is now under revision, exactly because this new commission came with a new high climate agenda for decarbonize Europe by 2050. And this is called the European Green Deal, which was adopted last year, and includes a series of initiatives there that have a direct impact on the EU policy on energy efficiency and renewables, but also with regards to buildings, which are indeed a crucial part of the European Green Deal. And in the conclusion was that the building sector is one of the areas that more efforts must be ramped up. Next slide, please. In order to actually implement the European Green Deal, we adopted the climate target plan for 2030 with a goal to cut net greenhouse gas emissions in the EU by at least 55% by 2030. And actually this triggers actions for all different sectors. As I mentioned before, the building sector is one of the most important areas. Together, of course, with the renewable sector, with the need to start banning fossil fuels, for example, and so on. Next slide, please. So this is why, among other initiatives, the Commission has also announced the Renovation Wave initiative as part of the European Green Deal, with the objective to at least double the annual energy renovation rate of residential and non-residential buildings in the EU. And yes, I will try to speed up a little bit, and also make sure that renovations lead to a higher and deeper quality. Next slide, please. I'm sorry for this. So indeed, there are still many barriers related to building renovations, as also presented before. And actually, the Renovation Wave wants to address these barriers, such as access to financing or information for consumers. And please, I want to drink some water. One moment. I'm really sorry. So indeed, there are many barriers that we need to address, both by the Renovation Wave, but also through the revision of our directive. Next slide, please. And indeed, this is the case with the Renovation Wave. I'm just trying to keep the time frame. So next slide, please. And also bring into the discussion other key principles, such as the energy efficiency first, affordability, energy poverty, life cycle thinking, high health and environmental standards like safety reasons, also aesthetics, and so on. Next slide. The main initiatives that we're taking under under the Renovation Wave is to better inform citizens through digital logbooks or through EPCs and so on, increase funding, and also provide technical assistance. Also work on skills necessary, the capacities of professionals in the construction sector, but also try to address other elements such as smartness in buildings and renewables. Next slide, please. The focus areas are the worst performing buildings and the energy poverty. This is where we need to focus for obvious reasons, but also the public buildings, and with a focus on schools, hospital, and care facilities. Again, it is important to also see the decarbonization of heating and cooling sector, and it's interesting to also explore what is happening in what we call neighborhood approaches or district approaches. So applying some requirements in the neighborhood approach. Next slide. So Yes, this is the golden triangle that we need financing, regulation, as well as governance here. We have a high list of actions needed. Of course, there are many, many, many more here. We need citizens on board, we need professional, academia, everything. Next slide. And no, we've seen this one, I think, with the, so let's move to the next one, please. So with regards to budget, we have accompanied the renovation with a high list of investment opportunities, funding opportunities that could be applied either for direct investments or instruments to leverage private assessments, different for market barriers, technical assistance, and so on. And we can also refer to the recovery plans and the recovery resilience facility, which was to recover our economy from the pandemic. And a lot of money are coming out from this fund. Next slide, please. So yes, indeed, the recovery resilience facility has already, I mean, according to our estimations so far, there are almost 60 to 50 billion euros, 60 to 70 billion euros already approved to be used in member states for renovation purposes. We also have cohesion policy funds, and we estimate another 20, 30 billion euros to target construction and renovations in the coming years. Yes, yes. Next slide, please. Yes, again, this is what I was trying to briefly present you before about the need for buildings to be improved. We've seen that in with the pandemic. Next slide, please. And this is for more details if you want to see how, I mean, the money flows so far with the recovery plans. And next slide, please. I know that we are running out of time. This is what we're actually trying now to revise in our legislation. So we're actually trying to go for a deep renovation standards, but also for minimum energy performance standards. So if you want to sell or rent a house, you cannot go beyond a specific threshold. We're asking for building renovation passports, strengthening the energy performance certificates, and actually trying to go for set up a new vision for net zero emission buildings after 2030. New metrics, including greenhouse gas emissions, new provisions for electromobility, for smart readiness indicators. So there are much happening at the moment, trying to address the barriers and also put more emphasis to citizens, but also incorporate as much as possible solutions there for renewables and other technologies. I think this should be. Sorry for all these technicalities with the presentation, with my voice, with running out of time, but I'm here to reply to any questions you might have. Sorry for any inconvenience. Bye.
Great, thank you, Demetrius. Since we're a little bit behind schedule, but it seems we don't have all that many questions yet, so hopefully we can still keep us on time. Next we have Kaisa Rita Kaskina, who's from Carbon Neutral Helsinki 2035. Go ahead. We can't hear you. Are you muted? No, we still can't hear you. Nope. It looks like you're unmuted. Is you on a different speaker, perhaps? Didn't someone say at the beginning they're looking forward to in person? No. Did you accept computer audio? Yep. Can you go out and come back in and we can move on to the next speaker and then see if we can get you back after that? Great. So Michael Jack from the University of Otago is our next speaker. Michael, are you good?
Yep, good for me. I'll just share my screen. Kia ora koutou, everyone. I'm Michael Jack. I'm Director of the Energy Program at the Department of Physics, University of Otago. Can you hear me all okay?
Yep, loud and clear. Thanks, Michael.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I guess I'm talking, some of the talks so far have been about solutions, and I want to talk more about some of the why. As we heard right at the beginning from Lynn, there are a number of studies that have highlighted the poor state of New Zealand housing and the impacts on health and energy poverty of that. And it's interesting, if you look at a graph of the energy intensity of OECD countries, and even adjust that for climate, you find that New Zealand actually has one of the lowest energy intensities across all those countries. And that's not because we have particularly efficient buildings, it's because we are not heating our houses enough. Okay. So, you know, as we've discussed, these high performance housing types that we're talking about have this proven long-term benefits for health and energy affordability. What I want to talk about is the synergies with renewable energy supply. Okay, so this is kind of another motivation for thinking about these efficient buildings. So I guess for the Europeans, New Zealand has 85% renewable electricity, mainly dominated by hydro. And of course, therefore, our main decarbonisation strategy is essentially, let's increase the percentage of renewable electricity we have and then electrify everything. And that means essentially transport and heat. So that's kind of the basic idea. The big challenge with renewables, though, is that they're non-dispatchable. And so there's this mismatch between supply and demand. And this is very easy to see in the case of, say, solar photovoltaics, where you have solar providing energy during the middle of the day, whereas that's not necessarily where your demand for energy is. You can solve this problem with energy storage. And the sort of size of the energy storage that you require is given by the area under the curve on this graph here. And this can work with short duration mismatches between supply and demand. But there's really no economic solutions for longer term supply and demand mismatches. They just simply don't exist from a technical sense. And this is a big problem for New Zealand. Because we have a significant winter peak in electricity demand. So this is shown in the graph there where I'm just showing monthly electricity demand. So there's a large base load, but then there's this peak in winter. This is a big problem in so-called dry years, where we don't have much rainfall and our hydro lakes are low. And this results in a seasonal supply-demand mismatch. So unlike the supply-demand mismatch I showed before with solar, which was daily, this is on a seasonal basis. So you have this huge amount of energy that you have to supply if you were trying to store it. And that means if you're thinking about trying to solve this problem from the supply side, then you would need to think about overbuilding renewable generation, so overbuilding wind, for example, or large-scale storage solutions like a large a pumped hydro storage scheme, which is being discussed. And some of this has been brought up as an argument for not pursuing 100% renewable electricity. We can't do it, so we will just have to accept not being able to achieve that 100%. But there's been very little discussion of what actually causes this winter peak in demand. And Lynn mentioned this before, that actually, if you look very closely, it's residential space heating demand. So I've just plotted on the bottom of that graph the residential space heating demand that's been estimated. And you can see that there's this very clear overlap with the national demand. And it turns out that this is almost the majority of that seasonal demand. So this kind of inspired us to think about trying to quantify the impact of energy efficient housings on this seasonal supply demand mismatch. So we wanted to look at future residential heating scenarios. We chose a time period, 2020 to 2050, to align with kind of climate targets. And first of all, we developed a stock model for detached houses. Now, detached houses in New Zealand make up about 90% of the floor area of our houses, so it's a kind of a good thing to focus on at first. There are multiple assumptions behind this stock model, and I don't have time to go into it here, but I'll just show you the results. So this is what it looks like in terms of total floor area, and you can see that we've got new houses being built due to our demolishing rate. So our lifetime of a house is around about 90 years. And then also there's an aggressive retrofitting program going on here. And this is based off the consented retrofits that are happening now. Of course, those retrofits are not energy efficiency retrofits, but it gives us a baseline for thinking about the rate at which you could retrofit buildings. And that becomes very important. So on top of that stock model, we considered a range of different building standards for new builds and retrofits. So we looked at the current New Zealand Building Code. We looked at a number of the green building standards, which we're calling medium to high standards. We looked at the passive house standard, which here I'm referring to as very high. And in addition, we looked at a progressive approach, where you would go from the New Zealand Building Code to the passive house standard over that time period, that 30-year time period. I guess the other thing we assumed is that all houses are heated to healthy temperatures. This provides a baseline for our study, but it doesn't make sense to think about future scenarios where you continue to have unhealthy houses. Okay, so I'll just immediately leap into the results, just because we don't have time to talk about too much of the details. What I've plotted here is the annual space heating demand for each of those different scenarios. The top curve here is the building code results. Oops, sorry, is the building code results, and that shows a huge increase in space heating demand, annual space heating demand, and that is because we are now heating our houses to 20 degrees. And with the types of insulation that even the building code provides, that's going to mean that total annual demand is going to grow. In contrast to that, you can see the very high standard where, even though we've got a growth in buildings, we're heating to healthy temperatures, you are not getting a growth in annual demand. And so the difference between those two is around about 66% reduction. It's also interesting to kind of have a look at what this looks like in terms of new builds versus retrofits. And from this graph, you can see that the orange part compared to the yellow part makes up a huge component of that space heating demand. So again, retrofits are really critical. What we were really interested in though is this monthly space heating demand, and that was the real focus of our study. So this is the monthly space heating demand for each of those scenarios in 2050. Okay, so we've got the current space heating demand, which is the black dotted line there. The building code scenario, which is the orange line, and you can see that huge increase in winter demand due to that scenario, and then the very high scenario, which was basically the passive house standard, reducing space heating demand below where it currently is at the moment, even with new builds and heating to energy efficient temperatures. Okay, so this doesn't, that's basically equates to an 80% reduction in the area of that peak that I was talking about, that is the problematic issue. So this space heating demand does not directly relate to electricity peak, because it's a space heating demand rather than an electricity demand. To understand the impact on electricity, you have to first of all understand that in New Zealand we use about 70% of heating in buildings is provided by electricity, and this is likely to increase with that electrify everything scenario. But it also depends on the efficiency of electrical heating. So a good way of looking at that is to look at the national average measured heating performance of your heating devices. So this graph shows you the area under the peak as a function of that national average. Currently we're sitting at about 1.5. So we get about 1.5 units of heat out of every unit of electricity. In contrast, the heat pump coefficient of performance is 2 to 3. So that means we're doing a lot of heating just with straight resistance heaters. And this graph shows you the area under the peak. That solid line there is that current peak. The dotted line here is the residential heating demand, and you can see how this changes as you increase that, as you look at that measured heating demand, and we expect it to increase in the future. Where it will end up, we're not too sure, but for realistic measured heating performances, these buildings have a significant impact on reducing that peak. So just kind of in summary, often buildings are kind of neglected or ignored in sort of decarbonisation discussions, or at least put to one side, and that's because only 4% of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, come from buildings. But the point here is that these best practice standards could significantly reduce winter heating demand. And that could also help integration of renewables and thus decarbonisation of the overall energy system. What our results have shown is that slower implementation will significantly delay these benefits, and that retrofits are critical. So I guess what we kind of are arguing for is that there are a bunch of different reasons why you want this energy efficient residential buildings, and it's both based on their health, efficiency, and energy affordability benefits, but also their role that we've tried to show in decarbonisation and enabling renewables. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Michael. That was fantastic. It looks like we have some questions for you coming in for the Q&A round. Before we get to that, we have a couple more speakers, and hopefully we'll try to get a little bit more back on time. Everybody, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A chat, and remember that you can also vote for your favorite questions to get those higher priority. Okay, let's go back to Rita and see, hopefully we've got her audio sorted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, that's fantastic. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. So I try to share my slides. And good morning, everybody. Good evening. And actually, it's midnight here in Finland, so it's a good night for me. I'm going to tell you something about what we are doing here in Helsinki. I'm a head of climate unit. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yep, those are great.
Perfect. Yeah. I'm leading our carbon neutral Helsinki program, and because of that, I'm of course, mainly interested about the climate emissions and energy efficiency of the buildings. For me, is mainly a climate thing, and that's why my presentation is mainly focusing on the climate emissions and how energy efficiency of the buildings is related to that. And this picture shows you the reality in Helsinki at the moment. So these are the direct emissions in Helsinki. And as you can see, it's heating is the main. It's more than half of the emissions at the moment. And of course, because of that, the buildings and energy, what we need on the buildings is a main thing in our climate program. City of Helsinki has a target to be a carbon neutral by 2035. But a couple of weeks ago, our new regime, a new city council and a new mayor, they decided that, okay, they want to make this even more ambitious. And they decided that, okay, we want to be a carbon neutral already in 2030. And it's even not enough because, on 2040, we have to be a zero carbon. So we even have to go further than just carbon neutral. Here you can see also, how we are doing at the moment. We have cut emissions by 1/3 already. And it's 1/3 of the total emissions. City is growing all the time, so we are building a lot of new buildings, and there are more people living, more traffic, more cars on the streets, and by resident, by person, we have got emissions by half already. But as you can see in this picture, it's not updated. It's the decision of the new target was made a couple of weeks ago, so that's why we haven't had time to update this as a slide. But you can see that we have a very steep curve ahead of us, so we have to do more, coming in coming years to achieve our target to be a carbon neutral by 2030. And basically, what does it mean? It means that energy efficiency is our first priority. And when we started to work and to look for the energy efficiency a couple of years ago, we realized that we have a very different kind of buildings, very different kind of group of buildings here in the city, and we cannot handle all of them, in a one big group, but we have to prioritize, and we have to do different things for the different group of the buildings. And where we started first was the buildings owned by the city, and about the 20% of the buildings here in Helsinki is owned by the city. And so it's quite easy, so because we can just decide, we can just mandate what we are doing there. And first of all, we decided that we have to put a very ambitious energy efficiency targets for our own buildings. And every single new building built in Helsinki has to be 30% more energy efficient than the national code is requiring. And the national code is based on the European Union legislation. So the level for the new buildings, the requirement for the new buildings is actually quite strict already, but still we go 1/3 below that index, that indicator. Every renovation we do it's it is an energy renovation. So at least 34% of the energy consumption needs to go away every time we renovate something. We are also, the geothermal or the heat pumps are the main heating system for the new buildings, and we are installing a lot of solar PVs on the buildings we own. But of course, it's not everything. 80% of the buildings in the city, they are owned by the others. And of course, we have to, it's not enough that we are only concentrating on the buildings owned by the city. And what we are doing for those buildings owned by the others, first of all, we are able to set requirements, a rental agreement requirements for those buildings. And we mandated that all new buildings here in the city, they have to be in the best energy efficiency class. So every building has to be on the A class. And it's possible because the city of Helsinki owns the most of the land here in Helsinki, and we are renting the land out. So we are not selling it out, but we are renting it out. And as a rental agreement requirement, we are able to set that kind of mandatory requirements for the buildings. But then we have a lot of a big existing stock which is owned by the private, mainly by the private people, and there we don't have any kind of we don't have a power to force them to do anything. And a couple of years ago we studied that a lot, and we find out that the main reason, the main obstacle, the main bottleneck for the energy efficiency renovations, energy renovations, is that they are very difficult for the normal people. In Finland, if you own an apartment in the residential buildings, you are automatically a shareholder in the housing associations. So the buildings are run mainly by the normal people, and they don't know where to start. And to tackle that, we started a team called Energy Renaissance, and we hired 10 engineers, energy engineers, to work for the city, and their main job is to help private house owners to run energy renovations, and they are really that kind of hands-on help for the normal people to run an energy renovation. And it has been a great success. So we have a more job that more asks and more contacts that we can handle. And it is just showing that the money is there. Energy efficiency renovations, they actually made economical sense here in Finland. So the main obstacle was really that kind of the people, they really need the engineering power, and now we are offering that for them and trying to tackle the obstacle. But of course, it's not enough only focus on the energy efficiency. We also have to clean the heat production. And to do that, in Helsinki, we run a Helsinki Energy Challenge 1.5 years ago. And it was the challenge competition, how to get rid of the coal on the energy production side. But even to focus on that, it's not enough, because the energy efficiency and the energy production, it's the direct emissions, and when we are building something, we are also generating indirect emissions, and we also have to concentrate and focus on those. And the next step, what we are going to do here is that we are going to set a limit for the carbon footprint for the buildings, because we also want to regulate and minimize the footprint of the buildings and that kind of indirect material related embodied carbon emissions. And it's basically I've already listed that there are many things we have to do first. And I'm always saying that we only have 9 years to be a carbon neutral, and it means that we don't have that kind of luxury that we do things step by step, but we have to do many things at the same time. We have to do big things first, as time is our biggest enemy. And I started with this slide, and I'm going to stop it. Stop with this slide as well. Because at the beginning I told you that we have a very a steep curve ahead of us. We have to do much more. But you can also they can make a different kind of interpretation with this picture, because we have already cut our emissions by 1/3. We have already come down 33%. And the quality of life here in Finland, comparing to the year 1990, it has not come down. Actually, the quality of life is much higher and much better now than 30 years ago. And so, when people are worried about the what kind of a lifestyle we are going to have in the carbon neutral and zero carbon world, we can show them, we can say that, okay, we have shown already that we are able to do it and still keep a very good quality of life if we do it wisely. And here you can find a little bit more information. There are links here if you are interested to see what we are doing here in Helsinki, and there are also my contact details if you have some questions. But thank you on my behalf.
Thanks, that was fantastic. And thank you for staying up so late. So since we're running a little bit behind, I might rush right over to Andrew.
Kia ora, everybody. Ina mana, ina reo, ira rangatira ma, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah,
right?
you're great. No, that's
Excellent.
great.
Super. Well, first of all, a huge thank you. I'm the last speaker, right? So first of all, I'm really honoured to be on this amazing panel. What the other speakers are saying makes my heart sing, and it also makes it very hard to say something additional. So I've structured my presentation on that, but hearing things like energy efficiency first, I'm sure Michael, Jack and others will agree that that's just absolutely tremendously exciting. In New Zealand, when we often talk about this sort of thing, what we talk about is more energy supply rather than improving our buildings and homes. So it's just great to hear those examples from Europe. So a big kia ora, thank you for that, great mahi. So I'm going to rattle through this really fast. 5 areas of focus for lower carbon healthy Aotearoa. Just some comments on where we're at with existing buildings and homes, and then to comment on new buildings and homes and how we can drive forward change on operational carbon, embodied carbon, and then wider carbon impacts. I thought that those might not be picked up by others. So I look forward to the discussions. First of all, in Aotearoa, we don't have a measurement for how to measure the carbon impact or health of existing homes. So we have no energy performance certificate, nothing like that here in New Zealand at the moment. 30%, as Lynn said at the start, 30% of our homes are damp and mouldy. And we have tens of thousands of commercial buildings with no measurement independently verified of their existing energy use or carbon impacts. We looked at this with our Green Recovery report and set out that that kickstarting a just transition could be driven through improving 120,000 homes, would deliver billions of dollars worth of stimulus, lower carbon emissions, healthy outcomes, and help kickstart a just transition by creating 1,200 new jobs in Aotearoa. And the International Energy Agency says one of the quickest ways to create really good jobs is to get retrofitting existing homes. But also on buildings, I noticed that this conversation was also around buildings. I thought I'd illustrate the power of getting a standard in and measuring to that. NEIGHBOURS is a scheme that is mandatory in Australia. I thought I'd show you the power of uptake of this tool in Australia. So in 2007, less than 10% of office buildings got 4, 5 or 6 star ratings. And then states started to say that they wanted 4, 5 or 6 star rated office buildings when they leased. So by 2010, that was close to 20% of office buildings were energy efficient. And then government brought in mandatory display of energy efficiency of office buildings, something that you take for granted in the EU. But by 2016, you had over 50% of office buildings in Australia, the larger office buildings, were at 4, 5 or 6 star ratings. So massive injection of private capital to improve the office stock. And that saved Australian businesses and government taxpayers around $1 billion worth of energy bills. In New Zealand, we've looked at this and we've found that implementing a transparency regime such as NABERS would deliver a saving of just under $600 per tonne saved and deliver $47 to $120 million worth of benefits just from implementing this measure for office buildings alone. So NABERS delivers 30 to 40% saving in the energy use of office buildings. And this is a big deal. If we took just 1,200 of New Zealand's larger office buildings and got them to low, near zero energy, that saves the amount of energy that we generate from all of the wind turbines in New Zealand. So we're calling on government to deliver this NABERS regime for office buildings and then look to extend it to other buildings. We'd like them to do that next year in this electoral term. On existing homes, there is a program in New Zealand called Warmer Kiwi Homes, and it has increased the number of homes being improved by 40,000 extra homes, which is a step forward. Our kind of challenge is that this is still relatively, it is improvements to homes, but it's not talking about windows or deep retrofits, air tightness, those sorts of measures that we see from Energy Strong or other measures. And I just list some other international examples. You heard some here of great case studies where you're getting deep retrofit to reduce carbon and improve health. So we're calling on government to create a comprehensive plan to decarbonise and improve the health of New Zealand homes at scale. And then I just thought I'd touch on embodied carbon. We have been making some inroads on how we think about embodied carbon in New Zealand, and this is really crucial. It's about half of our carbon emissions. So we've called for change through our zero carbon roadmap. And you can see here, I thought this might not be touched on as much by other speakers, but some of those building materials, concrete, steel and aluminium in particular, are quite significant for non-residential buildings. And we need to think about that as well when we decarbonise. So government is stepping up on this. They're calling on government departments to create a low carbon brief and prioritise a focus on measuring and reducing embodied carbon emissions when they build new buildings. And they're driving that quite hard. It's good to see that. I think we need more checks at the built stage, but embodied carbon is coming to the fore in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so through the building code, we now have expected improvements to a goal of near zero energy by 2030 to 35, a focus on measurement and in time reduction in embodied carbon, and a strong signal from the Building for Climate Change team who are leading that entities should be building ahead of the building code, a bit like the Helsinki example. So what we've done at the New Zealand Green Building Council is we've created tools that can enable people to meet those future regulatory changes. So I'll just set that out in this slide. So the possible timings are around 3 caps to get to near zero energy in our homes and buildings, probably changing around 2024, something like 2027 and then 2030. And so we've created tools to align with those CACs so that people can know ahead of the CAC changes how they're doing on operational and embodied carbon emissions. And I do think, particularly in New Zealand, with our low carbon grid, or Michael Jack raises some really good points around how we can save a lot of energy through our grid for other uses and peak load. It's going to be really important that we also focus on embodied carbon over time. So I have just some points for reducing embodied carbon. New Zealand homes are 5 times their carbon footprint needed to reach Paris climate change targets. So we need to look at this and also operational carbon and get down to those low operational carbon targets as well through passive house or super energy efficient homes. So these are some steps we can take to reduce embodied carbon in the homes and the buildings we're building as well. And then I just sort of touch on a small plug for urban design and low carbon impacts and how we think about that in a wider sense. So how we build has a huge impact on transport emissions. So we're seeing huge increase in cycling as a result of good end of trip facilities and buildings. We think e-transport needs to be heavily integrated and incentivized and being near public transport. I know we all know this, but sometimes I think we might not focus on it enough, and we need to encourage building denser. And in New Zealand, there has been a step forward on this recently with reducing minimum requirements, so therefore to enable people to build more denser in general, which is positive. And then finally, just to consider resilience to climate change, water shortages, overheating and flood risks. Auckland's been in a drought for over 2 years, and yet we have no incentives when we build new homes or retrofit to put in water efficient devices. There's no measurement of water efficiency in our office buildings. So here's just an example, buildings taken ahead by Aotearoa Community Housing Trust in Christchurch, and they built a 7-home star, over 30% better than building code, warmer and healthier, but also some great stuff on active transport, e-charging, and some steps on density and resource efficiency. So it's a huge kia ora for the opportunity to speak today. I really look forward to the discussion. I've gone through it pretty fast. I know we're over time. Big thank you from the New Zealand Green Building Council. We work on behalf of our 600 members. I really look forward to the discussion and driving this further forward to a low carbon future. Kia ora.
Thanks, Andrew, that was great. And it does look like the panelists have been diligent about actually answering all of the questions that have been asked, at least by putting in some responses. So perhaps though we could get a bit of discussion. It looks like our most popular question may have been about a discussion on cooling. It looks like Michael Jack, you had written an answer to that so that we know about the issues with heating, but we're kind of lucky in New Zealand that we don't necessarily need a lot of cooling, but that's going to change. Can you take that question and can we maybe spotlight the panelists?
Yeah, I can probably say something about it, but I'm sure the panelists have a lot more to say about this than me. I guess because I'm focusing on things like how do you supply it with renewable energy. I always think about cooling as being almost perfectly matched with things like solar PV. So to me, it's kind of less of a technical problem. Obviously, it increases energy use, but the point is that you have potential renewable solutions to that. So maybe someone else could talk more about the building side of things and how you avoid heating in the first place.
Any of our other panelists want to pick that up?
Well, I can just talk to it briefly, but I do think that with our changing climate, we need to think about really carefully when we're moving to more airtight buildings, consider things like cross ventilation, shading, the sorts of measures that the London Design Guide has included, particularly in buildings like apartments and as we get more airtight. And that's quite new thinking for New Zealand. Equally, you know, moving to heat pumps can provide that cooling effect, but of course that is a bigger drain on electricity. But I think for many in New Zealand, it's going to be new to think about orientation, getting that sun, but also considering the potential for overheating. So louvers, trees that deciduous trees that keep the leaves in the summer to provide some shading and reducing potential overheating. You can have quite significant concerns, particularly for vulnerable people. We need to get that right as well.
Sorry, Lynn.
Go ahead.
I think as in the chat box, Matthew Cutler-Welch was also pointing out, we actually have simulation tools available that are allowing us to simulate the potential overheating of buildings. And it comes back to, I mean, orientation is nice if we have that opportunity at hand, but looking at infill and higher density, we actually need to allow for us to simulate that with using the appropriate tools available. And we already have that in the background as the engine for the new Homestar 5 version of from the Green Building Council as well. So the tools are already available, you just need to use them.
Great, thank you. And I see that you did post a link to more information about your passive house. So there was a question about that, so that's fantastic. Hopefully people will look more into that. That's great. One last question, perhaps. There was a question for Kaisarita about Helsinki's targets. It looks like you answered it in the chat, but maybe could you just give us a 1 or 2 minute summary of your thoughts on that?
Yes, so the question was about how we have been able to cut the emissions, and the biggest reason or the biggest thing is that we have been able to change energy production fuel. So we are burning less coal, and we have replaced that by natural gas. The second reason is that the electricity is getting cleaner very fast here in the Nordic market. So the emission factor of the electricity is going down. But it's also that the cars are less polluting. This is mainly because of the EU legislation. So there are limitations for the cars, and we can see that it's affecting. Last year, we also saw a drop on the kilometers driven, but it's probably due to the COVID-19. So let's see how permanent that the change is. And we have been able, with the previous energy efficiency measures, we have been able to keep the energy consumption on stable levels. So it has not been growing. And it's a very good achievement because the city is growing very fast at the same time. But at the moment, we have a target that we really would like to cut it by 20% by 2035. And that's, you know, even if the city is growing. So these are the biggest thing. Of course, there are many little things, you know, going under, but these are the main things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone so much. It looks like there was a couple of late entries in the question category. It looks like Michael Jack might have taken care of one, and Demetrius is taking care of the other. if there are any outstanding questions, we can direct those to the appropriate panelists. I'm cognizant of the late hour in Europe, so we just like to give everybody a big thank you for taking the time out of your day, both to present and also to attend and listen to us, to what all of these experts had to say, so we can hopefully improve our housing on multiple fronts, and try to achieve some cross-cutting benefits from the funds that we use to improve things. Thank you, everybody. I guess we'll wrap it there. If there's anything else, just get in touch, and again, we'll try to pass along any last minute questions or late entries to the appropriate people if you send them through. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. See you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.